really pleased to have our guest here, Rob Weinhold from the Fallston Group. So some of you maybe have been at American Gage's event before, so the way we like to do this is kind of interactive. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time sort of interviewing Rob. I'll introduce you who he is and give him a chance to tell you kind of what he's doing at the moment. But I'm going to interview him because I'm sort of practicing to be the Oprah, is that how you say it? Oprah Winfrey? You know, I have to learn how to pronounce that if I'm going to be that of Mount Vernon. You know, so I'm going to interview him, and then, but I'm, you know, any time when you want to kind of chime in, you know, just chime in, okay? And then I'm going to turn it over to you know, to the audience, to you, the audience, to ask questions, okay? So that's how we're going to do it, okay? And so, Rob, if you've been in the city for some time, I understand that Rob may be recognizable because, you know, I think you were the face for many years of the Baltimore Police Department. Rob actually is and we'll talk a little bit about his career. He's actually a UB graduate, and but he started off his career, and while he was at UB, actually, he was still doing this. He was a sworn-in member of the Baltimore Police Force, and was there for many years. As I said, became went to become the spokesperson in various jobs for the Baltimore Police, and then went to become chief of staff in the Department of Justice. Did a variety of pieces of work there. He's got an interesting career, made a transition, and has worked for Carl Ripley for several years. And I think, 2008, is that right? Am I remembering it?
Right.
Founded the Fallston Group, which he's going to talk about, you know, what they do. He's also the author, and I highly recommend this. It's The Art of Crisis Leadership, and it's cheaper than most textbooks, so
can't return it though.
And we're going to talk a little bit about what's in the what's in the book as well tonight. So welcome, Robin. So just to start off, let's start off with the Fallston Group, and you know, just to put everything in context, what does it do?
Well, we are a Baltimore-based executive advisory firm, and we work with large public companies all the way down to small restaurateurs and individuals. But we build, strengthen, and defend reputations each and every day. And we principally do that through three business verticals: crisis and issue leadership, strategic marketing and public relations, and we also have a safety and security arm of business as well. And intuitively, it may not sound like those verticals go together, but when you put it in the context of reputation and what's going on in the world today, they actually marry up very nicely. So we've been in business 8 years at this point, and grown year over year, and we're very excited. And there's no shortage of issues out there to deal with. I will say that we get engaged by these companies, everything from data breach to bad press, investigations, litigation, and social media attacks, sex scandals, and everything in between. So again, the world's on fire in many of these organizations, and you can see and read about them in the New York Times or CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whatever you prefer.
So what keeps you personally? What keeps you busy?
Keeps me busy. Actually, having your own business is very, very busy. I don't think you ever really turn it off. 7 days a week, you're always thinking about making sure that you over-deliver for your clients. You want to make sure that you're growing at the right pace. Employees, you know, there's always a management issue there with employees, and making sure that you're doing the right thing by the customer, but also making sure that you are predictive for the future. And so business keeps me very, very busy. I have 3 boys. They're a little bit older now. My youngest is a student at Maryland, and his phone calls keep me busy asking for money, so that's one thing that keeps me busy. And I like to boat. I like to enjoy the Chesapeake Bay, and I get out on the boat when I can. It just takes me away from business a little bit and allows me to rest and relax.
So you started off in the Baltimore Police Department. So how did you gravitate to being this expert on crisis leadership? And maybe add a little writer to this. What role, if any, did UB play in that? Okay.
Well, I always say, yeah, I did wear a badge and carry a gun for a living way back in the day when I had more hair. I was 30 pounds lighter. My 40 time was pretty quick back then. So if you ran down an alley, I had a pretty good shot at catching you. But, I worked the street for a number of years. I started off in northwestern Baltimore, Mondawmin, Pimlico, Park Heights Avenue. And my first 5 years really ran around and focused on violent crime. And the city, as you know, has a lot of issues, and it was no different back then. Murder, rape, robbery, was kind of the crime du jour. And then I went down to the southeastern part of town and worked the high rises, Little Italy, O'Donnell Heights, and those areas. And then an opening came up in the public affairs division. And in an effort to advance my career, I thought that it would be a nice career change. Ironically, I was going to University of Baltimore at the time, and UB provided just a wonderful outlet for me. I had an opportunity to take the uniform off, go to class, and really be around a lot of people who were in different industries. And so I found it very intriguing, people that would work for McCormick and many of the other businesses in town. And so for me, I felt like there was a whole new world of learning out there. And like most students at the time, I had initially gone to college down in the Carolinas. I played baseball, I pitched. Like most college kids, I had a little bit of fun. I got distracted by some blonde who I married. We celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. So I think that my marriage lasted a little bit longer than my baseball career would have, that's for sure. But then came back to Baltimore and went to UB and joined the police department at the same time. So I was telling a story earlier that one of the things, obviously you have to do term papers and whatnot, and I can remember the old Smith Corona electric typewriters. Had manual way back in the day, but we graduated to electric, and I actually had my typewriter set up in a local business on my post. And in between calls, I'd go in and I'd type my paper for class that night, and it was a little nerve-wracking sometimes because I wasn't sure whether I was going to get it done, but I took up to 4 classes and worked full-time and had 2 young children. So I say that my degree from the University of Baltimore, when people say, what are you most proud of? And outside of my family and my kids, and I would say that my degree from University of Baltimore was something I worked really, really hard for, huge time commitment, and I always say that it's my wife's degree as much as it is mine, because without her, taking care of the kids and being understanding and patient, I certainly wouldn't have had my degree, but it shaped my thinking an awful lot and made me very curious and allowed me to aspire to be in business one day.
And what led you to, because you went into public service, but what led you to this business, particularly around crisis leadership? I mean,
Yeah.
what was it you saw that said, well, there's a business here?
Well, it's funny because before I started the business, I did a lot of introspection, and I spoke to a lot of people who worked with me or who were mentors of mine and wanted to get their feedback. And the resounding feedback I received was, listen, Rob, you're an excellent leader. You love to establish vision. You love to mobilize people to achieve the mission, or whatever the case may be. And they would say, but if there's one person we turn to when things really go wrong, it's you. You know how to take a very, very complex situation, break it down into the many nuances and the bottom line, and make decisions today that will benefit people or organizations for years to come. And so with that in mind, I felt like I had a passion for helping people during life's most critical times. I felt like I had a competency, at least that's what people told me. I felt like I really made a difference in the world. And I saw this in policing because when you help people during their most desperate time, you earn their trust very quickly. And candidly, it's very, very rewarding. And you're not doing it to feed your own ego. You're doing it in the spirit of service to help others and make the world a better place. So when you think about all of that and what we do for a living, we really get an opportunity to change the course of someone's life. The last piece of that puzzle, by the way, passion, competency, and making a difference in the world, is couldn't you monetize it? right? And I would watch the news, somewhat of a news junkie, and being a public affairs director, you have to know what's going on in the world, particularly your city. And I said to myself, how was it that I could watch the news every evening and watch competent leaders, otherwise competent leaders, walk into a poll with their own reputations? So they were either getting really, really bad advice, or they were getting good advice that they were not taking, neither of which are acceptable. So I believe that overall executive teams do a very good job of advancing their mission. But when there's an issue of sensitivity, adversity, or crisis that arises, many of them have a hard time decision making because they're emotionally engaged, they're passionate about what they do, and they don't decision make in a way that is objective. You know, and oftentimes they make the wrong decision. So I felt like there was this little gap in the marketplace and maybe a cottage industry where I could be the guy that comes in who helps executive teams during life's most critical times, and either before, during, or after, and make sure that they turn short-term adversity into long-term advantage. One thing I will say about that is I know that crises cost organizations time, money, customers, or consumer confidence, and ultimately their career. And in the worst case of scenarios, lives. And tragically, we saw that in Florida recently. And generally in that order, by the way, time, money, customers, and ultimately your career. So Tiger, Toyota, Martha Stewart, Goldman Sachs, Penn State, BP, Ray Rice, the NFL, Lance Armstrong. I could go on and on and on, maybe teach a course about it, but you know.
Sounds like a Billy Joel record. I think
yes, exactly, right. So you look at all of these great brands, right? These really, really solid brands, Subway, you know, and everybody now, Jared goes to jail. What, are you kidding me? So the point is that these otherwise wonderful brands faced an issue, and the question wasn't whether they're going to face a crisis or not, because you don't need to go looking for it. In today's world, it's going to find you, particularly with the digitization. I always say that anyone with an internet connection and a recording device can wreak havoc on your brand. And today's leader must be prepared. And in my view, my big audacious idea is that crisis is a growth strategy. It's not something to be afraid of. It's going to happen. The question is, are you prepared?
So when you're thinking about these leaders, you know, what do you see as a difference between, let's say, an everyday great leader and a crisis leader? I mean,
Yeah.
what are the differences?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Seriously, who can't lead when profits are up, morale's great, the culture's where it needs to be, the sun is shining? Who can't lead during those times? Anybody can. But it takes a special kind of person. Under my philosophy on leadership is that leaders do 5 things really, really well. They teach, they communicate, they empower, they motivate, and they hold people accountable. And if you do those 5 things really, really well, you'll, more times than not, be an effective leader. But during crisis, to me, that's where leaders are made. And you know, Dr. George Everly, local doctor who works out of Hopkins and some other areas, and I've taught with him and helped create some curriculum, he talks about the resilient leadership model. And it's funny because you have to communicate effectively. I believe the underpinning of success is the ability to communicate effectively. I don't care how many vowels and consonants you have after your name. I don't care what your IQ was. At the end of the day, if you can't communicate effectively and mobilize people toward a common goal, you will never be as effective as you want to be. You can also never compromise your integrity. And we see it over and over and over again where somebody hedges the truth or doesn't tell you the whole truth or whatever the case may be. But once you lose it, you lose marketplace trust, and it's extremely hard to get back. You have to be decisive. This is a big one. A lot of people simply are not decisive. And research shows that people would rather follow someone who makes a wrong decision than no decision. So I would challenge you, are you the bottleneck in your organization or not? And a lot of people during crises, they're paralyzed. They don't know what decision to make. And they're waiting for someone to give them direction, or they're waiting for marketplace guidance, or whatever the case may be, but they're not making decisions. And I use the metaphor that they're just in a boat during a very difficult storm, and eventually they're going to hit the rocks instead of beginning to paddle and go in a positive direction. He also talks about making sure that you have what's called behavioral body armor. And behavioral body armor is really taking care of yourself. And we've seen this, Chief Charles Moose, who was the police chief at the time when the snipers were running around. And we've seen it, have seen it from many leaders where they become more and more emotional. So you have to eat right, you have to sleep right, you have to make sure that you are exercising, because you cannot lead others through the storm if you are not taking care of yourself. Some of us in this room have been caregivers, right, for people who are sick. But if you don't take care of yourself, you can't be the caregiver, you can't be the parent, you can't be the coach, you can't be the leader that you want to be to navigate people through a storm. So I've learned a lot of lessons along the way, but resilient leadership, crisis leadership is its own art form, and I do believe it's an art, it's not a science.
Is it?
I want to tell you one more thing.
Sure.
This is really good, I think. You know, hopefully you don't think. But the same doctor did a study about the Navy SEALs, and he wanted to know why certain people would go into the Navy SEALs and they would fail miserably, and he also wanted to know why others would go to the SEALs and they'd traverse through buds and they'd eventually become a SEAL, and then they'd be elevated through the ranks and ultimately become, you know, some of the best leaders that the country has ever seen. And how is it that a blue chip athlete out of high school would go to the Navy SEALs and fail miserably, but the somewhat socially awkward person, maybe played a JV sport or an activity or two, would not only go to the Navy SEALs, but ascend through the ranks, okay? So through his research, he was able to determine the single most important predictor of success of a Navy SEAL. The single most important predictor of success of a Navy SEAL. Somebody tell me what it is. Persistence. Great answer, not the one I'm looking for. Come on, this is a participation sport. Resilience? Nope, that's not the right one, sorry. But it's a great try, thank you for playing, it's good. Who else? Following orders, that's a great one too, but it's not the one I'm looking for. So persistence, resilience, the ability to follow orders, what else? Mental strength, awesome. Not the right one. Leadership, great. So think about those descriptors that everybody just threw out. If someone walked in the door right now and applied for your company or an organization, or you could make a decision as to whether or not that person worked next to you and had all of those qualities, would you hire them? You better believe you'd hire them, right? They're all great attributes. But the single most important predictor of success of a Navy SEAL, based on the research, is optimism. Think about that, optimism. We all have those people in our lives where we call them up, hey, how you doing? Well, the world's on my back. Oh man, you know, it's sunny out, but I know it's going to rain soon. Those kinds of people, right, that bring you down. And then other people we call, hey, I need a favor, can you help me out? Where are you? Where are you? Let's go do it. You know, we're going to make it happen. Doesn't matter how high, you know, the mountain is. We're going to do it together. Those people we love, right? But at my age, right? Now I'm 51, and I know it's tough when you look 29. I live with it every day. But to me, there's only two kinds of people in this world. Those who give me energy and those who take it away. That's it. Those who give me energy and those who take it away. So I would challenge everyone here to take inventory of those people around you in your personal life and your professional life. And you figure out who the drag on the bottom line is. You figure out those negative forces in your life and make that hard decision. And then you figure out who gives you energy and the kind of person that gives you energy and attract more of them. And I wish I'd have thought about that at a much earlier age, because like all of us in this room, we tolerate, right? We tolerate good. Kind of the enemy of great is good. Mm-hmm. But I would challenge you a little bit further. When you go home tonight, I think it's really, really important to look in the mirror. Or when you wake up tomorrow morning before you begin your day as a student or as a professional. And ask yourself, which one are you? Which one are you? Do you make people around you better? Or are you that empty bucket that's a drag on the bottom line and you're not doing everything you should in life to serve and to make others around you? Do you wake up in the morning and do you say to yourself, what am I going to get versus what am I going to give? Ask yourself that question. It's a critical, critical question, and I really believe it is part of the recipe of success. So anyway, I thought that research was very interesting, but optimism is part of that model, and I don't mean to be too long-winded here, but I think it's so, so important.
Now, it relates to, I was at a dean's conference a couple of weeks ago, and we had a professor from Stanford who gave a demonstration of how he taught his leadership class. And this guy's kind of controversial because he was actually, saying that as deans we were promoting too many soft stuff and that we weren't talking to students about the harder sides of life as a leader. And there's a kind of fine line between optimism and sort of forcefulness. And the scenario that he gave us that we all had to make comments on, he gave 2 case vignettes. So we had 2 videos. We had a video of Tim Hayward, you remember, Tim Hayward was the CEO of BP during the Deep Horizon scandal, and they had him presenting his beginning of his testimony to Congress, and a congressional committee, and then he had a Blankfein, CEO of Goldman Sachs, not the same congressional committee, but another the banking and finance committee on whether Goldman Sachs had created the financial crisis. So Tim Hayward, he started off. He's very English. I can't imitate his language because it's difficult for me to do that. But he had it written out, and he was deeply apologetic. I'm deeply sorry. That's how it started off, and it went on. And Lloyd Blankfein was kind of no apology, kind of in your face. He was sort of, this is what Goldman Sachs does. This is what we make contribution to the economy. Yes, there were difficult things had to happen. This is where we were. This is what we tried to do. This is what happened. There was no kind of apology and no kind of coming back when he was cut. So we had a long discussion about this. In fact, I know there's some students here. I'm making this a little bit long because I know there are some students here who are in the PR stream. So we had a discussion about what public relations people tell their clients and what the public relations person was telling Tim Hayward. And so this professor, he role-played being Tim Hayward. And he said, he doubted a public relations person would have told him this, but he said, look, he started off, we're BP, this is how many jobs we've created over the last 10 years in the US. We're deeply committed to the United States of America. This is how much we've invested. By the way, we're investing in the Gulf of Mexico because we think it's really important that the U.S. is actually free of, has got more independence around oil. And this is really dangerous business. And unfortunately, and very sadly, 4 American heroes died in the pursuit of this American dream to be independent in oil. We're trying to contribute to. And obviously we're going to have to get at the bottom of this, but I want you to recognize these are heroes. So we had a sort of discussion. So anyway, that's my thing. So here's my starting question here. From optimism to, in the middle of these kind of crises, these 2 guys, is it, the role of the apology, because that usually is the kind of first, one of the earliest things that we see, at some point there's an apology, how does the apology, what's your view about the apology? How does it work? And by the way, how does it relate to optimism?
Yeah, well, first off, I don't think optimism is Pollyannic, okay? It's not optimism in a vacuum or unrealistic optimism. It is instilling a sense of confidence in the people around you that you have a plan to go ahead and shepherd the organization through a very, very critical time, all right? So with the apology, my question is it heartfelt or is it a hoax, okay? How many people in this room are married? Keep your hands raised. How many are in a relationship, a significant relationship? How many have ever been in a relationship? Okay, it should be everybody,
Yeah.
right? So,
I was
yeah, I mentioned before I've been married a pretty long time at this point. And when you talk about the apology, if my wife were upset because I had been out a little late, maybe with the guys watching a football game or whatever it happens to be, and I came home and she was waiting and I walked in the door, do you think that she would go for I want to, first off, tell you how much you mean to me, and I want to apologize from the bottom of my heart for being out with the boy. No. People want to know that you're sorry. It needs to be heartfelt. You need to have a high level of connectivity and empathy. And if you go back and you look at Tiger Woods, after he went away for his, his health condition, and he came back and he apologized to the public, and you watch that. It was very, very scripted and very mechanical, okay? And candidly, it didn't come across well, all right? Tony Hayward, he actually made a fatal flaw during, the whole BP crisis in two respects. One is when he went out on the morning shows after the leak in the Gulf, he optimistically said, we're going to have this leak repaired within 30 days. 30 days later, NBC Nightly News had an oil cam at the bottom of the ocean. The oil slick in the Gulf was the size of Puerto Rico, getting bigger by the moment, okay? And he overshot, right? He overpromised and underdelivered. Brian Williams was reporting the news well, he had his own issues, right? Brian Williams with integrity. But the point I'm making is that it is the most heartfelt, passionate, connected way that we can be with those that we are apologizing to. Now, in this room, for instance, with the cameras, and many times you'll have a bank of press and all the cameras in the room, you need to connect with the consumers of the news, not the press corps. And that's another mistake a lot of leaders make, is that they feel like they're speaking to the reporters in the room. We see this every day during the White House press briefings. No, your consumer is in the living room watching you either online or through a television. I believe that America is a fairly forgiving society. I really do. And I believe that they're forgiving if, number one, they know that you are truly remorseful and that you're doing everything you can not to make the same mistake. They're also forgiving if they realize that you put your hand up and you take responsibility without being forced to. So if you're like Toyota or maybe some of the other cases you cited, and you get to a congressional hearing, and it's then and only then that you decide to apologize, it appears as if you are apologizing for some kind of gain and not that it's the right thing to do. So organizations have to take a hard look at their moral compass and decide, are we wrong? Does it warrant an apology? And if so, how do we make it? You may remember the Ray Rice incident with the Baltimore Ravens. And he went out in his press conference and he had his apology talking points on his phone, which went out. So now you're lost in a script in the middle of a live news conference. So long story short, mean it, deliver it in a way that is emotional, empathetic, and make sure that people really, really, really believe that you're sorry. Domino's had a case several years ago where in the Carolinas, a couple of the employees decided that they were going to, hopefully nobody's going to have Domino's, well, you're certainly not going to have Domino's after I tell you the story, but they put cheese up their nose and they did some things with the buns and some of the dough and whatnot, and they were playing a hoax, and they video recorded themselves, which shows you their level of sophistication, and they posted it and went viral, that they were basically defacing and contaminating pizzas before they went out the door. All right, so that goes viral. Now, when the news gets a hold of it, they call Domino's corporate, who says, we want your response to this because the local franchisee couldn't be reached. All right. Now, Domino's, to begin with, kind of gave them the Heisman and said, that's not our issue, that's a local issue, until it hit Good Morning America. And then it was a franchisor issue. Now, the chief executive of Domino's did what we call a VNR, a video news release, and he recorded an apology that he could send out and control the rules of engagement. And there's many names for them, but we'll just kind of call it the trust meter, and that is people watching his apology could rate the believability of the chief executive during his comments. And when he got emotional and he got angry about this not representing the Domino's brand, and how seriously he takes this type of incident, the meters, they flew off the charts. So people want to see your level of passion for what you do and that you are truly, truly sorry. I believe that they'll forgive you as long as you don't make the mistake again, like Congressman Weiner no pun intended.
So one of my favorite cases is Equifax,
Right.
which recently, people know the Equifax case. It was a data breach. They finally informed us several times. So I kind of personally get angry with this, but I mean, I think if you were a shareholder, I think you'd get even angrier because this is starting to mount up in the millions in terms of cost. So, I mean, what should the management have done there?
Well, first and foremost, the management, along with, by the way, the management of Uber, once they know about a breach and they know not even the level of impact, but they know about a breach and they know that consumers are impacted, they need to go public and they need to notify consumers, right? The fact that you sit on a breach for more than 3 months, 6 months, whatever the case may be, it is intolerable in this day and age that you're not notifying people about the risk that they now have because of a data breach. So if you know of organizations or you work with an organization who does not have a data breach strategy in place, then again, IT specialists will tell you there's two kinds of companies, those who know about the breach and those who just don't know it yet because everybody's been breached. So the question is, what are you doing about marketplace trust? Trust equals valuation, okay? We work with an organization in the northeastern part of the United States. They had like 10 different locations, and they were breached. They believed it was by the Russians. Secret Service was involved. It was a very, very large-scale international investigation. And I happened to be in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, doing a corporate retreat, and during the break, guy comes over to me and says, hey, can I talk to you a moment? It's crazy. We're talking about the art of crisis leadership. I have my own. So I went on the side. He told me what was going on. He said, I don't know what to do, but we've been compromised, and people's debit cards and personal information are now in the hands of criminals. And so immediately we said, you have to tell them. You have to respond to the news media because it's a matter of time before they find out. So I always believe in controlling the rules of engagement. Go to market first. There's a mantra in our business, and our mantra in the Fallston Group, if you don't tell your story, someone else will. And when someone else tells your story, it certainly won't be the story you want told. So why would you sit back and wait in a foxhole and wait for the news to break, and now you're on defense and in response mode versus going out and telling your story and controlling the storyline? Very, very important. And Equifax failed, Uber failed. In fact, today's news, the state attorney general, I think of Pennsylvania, suing Uber for that very, very reason, that they did not do enough to protect the consumers who trusted them with their information. And you've heard me use the term trust several times this evening, and it's all about trust.
Now, on the other side, one of my favorite cases, and now this may be just because I read the Financial Times, and maybe you're not into this, but is recent one is KFC in the UK. Do people remember this one? It's this is where the stores actually ran out of chicken. 90% of their stores ran out of chicken because they changed their distributor, and the distributor, which was DHL, is one of the people in the distribution chain, didn't quite get it together. Now I've got to tell you, Yum Foods, which owns KFC, used to be one of my clients, and I usually love everything about my clients when I was a consultant, but I have to confess that they own Pizza Hut. I can get into Pizza Hut. They own Taco Bell. I can even love Taco Bell, but I've never been in a KFC. So
pretty good. You ought to get there, Murray. It's pretty good.
Yeah. No, but actually, no. I'm a huge fan of KFC now after this crisis because they're first of all, look, some of it was quite, some of the tweets were quite good. We've got the stores, we've got the chickens, we just haven't brought them together. That was one of their tweets. But I learned a lot about KFC I didn't know. I mean, they have fresh chicken. Do you know that? It's not frozen chicken. One of the reasons that their distributor had a lot of problems was that if you have fresh chicken, there's clearly big health issues, and so they inspect it twice as much as they're really required to under the law. they prefer local sourcing. In the U.S., I believe there's a mileage limit on how much they'll source it from. So I think this is great. I'm a huge fan. We're going out for dinner later.
Perfect.
But I mean, so I'm kind of energized by them. But I mean, is there a learning here? I mean, I don't know what you think of that case, but learning from also the positive cases, or
there's a huge lesson learned here for everyone, and I have found that the people who don't just survive but thrive during crisis, they embrace their situations. A lot of people do not embrace. In other words, they think tomorrow's a new day, maybe it will go away. They might have an ego and they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to leverage their networks because they're embarrassed. But when you embrace a difficult situation, whether it's an issue or a full-blown crisis, I have found that the most successful organizations and people do that. I thought that Kentucky Fried Chicken did a masterful job of laughing at themselves publicly. People know that they didn't want that to happen, and it did. So they made a joke about it. And you know what? We're talking about it right now, and I predict that you're going to try Kentucky Fried Chicken here in the next 30 days because of that story. Yeah. Something else that's been in the news recently is Crock-Pot. Is everybody familiar with the whole Crock-Pot controversy where the show This Is Us, people probably know that show, and one of the main characters died in the show, and the storyline was that the Crock-Pot suddenly combusted and sparked, caught fire, and burned the house or the apartment down and killed the character. Well, could you imagine Crock-Pot being the PR guy at Crock-Pot who probably never had a call in the world, all of a sudden, Crock-Pot, people are tweeting about Crock-Pot, they're dangerous, this is a shame, they killed the character, all this stuff. And Crock-Pot did not even have a Twitter account, okay? So what did they do? They didn't come out and say, this is ridiculous, the writers of the show, they should be ashamed of themselves, Crock-Pot stands for XYZ. No, they came out and they humanized their organization. And they said, wow, we were really upset too that this character died. We love that show. And this, that, and the other thing. And they said, but we want you to also know a little bit about Crock-Pot. We've been around for 50 years. We do a tremendous amount of quality control work. And here's what we do. So you got a chance. They use that as a platform to teach people about their product and the longevity and how it's been a big part of people's lives, and they hand it down from generation to generation. And so they embraced, this little issue, much like KFC did. Tide Pods, same thing recently, right? All the kids sticking Tide Pods in their mouths and getting some. I see some of you nodding back there like you tried. Anybody here try it? Let's put the camera on them. I like to know. But anyway, causes a high or a sensation or whatever the case may be, and it went viral on YouTube. And Tide did a pretty good job of going out there and making sure that they opened up communications lines. They created hotlines for people to call about medical questions. They wanted people to follow up with direct messages to let them know how their interaction with poison control or a medical doctor went. In other words, they showed a degree of humanity and empathy as it related. They went out and they got Gronk to do some PSAs before he lost the Super Bowl, but they went out and they got Gronk to do some PSAs. And YouTube actually stepped up to the plate and removed some of those videos so that kids couldn't copy one another. So between KFC, Crock-Pot, and Tide, I think that they all have done a pretty good job, in this digital age to be responsive and to make sure that they're responsive quickly. Back in the day, before the digital age, you could say, well, we've got a response here, but we've got to go to legal and let them study it for 30 days. And then there's this big lag, right, in going to market. Now, decisions need to be made much more quickly, on the fly, and it's more challenging. But there's more opportunity because you have a platform to amplify your message, and you don't have to wait for the 4 or 5, 6 o'clock news, or wait for Walter Cronkite for those of you who know who Walter Cronkite even is. So that means we're old. I think that means we're old.
Yeah, it may do. Who was he? Sorry.
Right.
Sorry. So, I mean, I know. I can imagine in the Fallston Group, and for you personally, there are a number of your clients are people who are already in crisis, and so you're helping them. But if you have a new client who's not in a crisis and comes to you and wants to be prepared, where do you start?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because people will say, well, what can I do? We're not in crisis, so we don't need you, but what can I do to be more prepared? And we do something called a crisis assessment. Sometimes we'll call it a surveillance or whatever the case may be. And we'll interview 8, 10, 12 different executives individually, all right? Board members, executives, key personnel like human resource directors, chief legal counsels. And the first 10 minutes of the meeting will orient their thinking, and we'll talk to them about resiliency, and there's something else called the resilient moment communications model, which is a great model. But we get them thinking about risk, and we say, listen, think about your business goals, and when the clock strikes midnight at the end of your fiscal year, what could prevent you from hitting those goals that cost you time, money, customers, and your career? And it's amazing. I tell them we're all on the same team. We'll interview them for an hour, hour and a half, and they'll say things like, my market, the marketing's not accurate, or supply chains, we don't have redundancy, or the chief executive walks around and says whatever he or she wants, and they're a ticking time bomb waiting to happen. We're not handling our distribution properly, or we're not packaging, we're cutting corners. So all these things come out, and pretty soon we develop a pattern over a series of a day or two, and we put together a report, an assessment, a confidential assessment for the chief executive, and we say, here's your 8, 10, 12 different points of exposure. We'll then marry that up against what's happening in the industry, all right? So, if you're in banking, right, there's a lot of triggering events that occur, or if you're in automotive, or whatever the case may be, and we'll say, this is what's happening in the industry, this is what your own people are saying. These people are self-reporting, and we do it anonymously, and here are your points of exposure. Now, from this report, let's figure out what we can do to reduce those points of exposure and make sure you're ready to meet the moment. So we do the assessment, and then we develop a crisis plan around the assessment, okay? Because there's a concept called organizational muscle memory, which is really, really, really important. And studies show, whether you're in policing or whether you're in the military, how you practice is how you're going to play. When people are under duress, they resort or revert back to their training, all right? And if they've had no training, they're going to do whatever comes to mind. But if they've had, not had training, but if they've had training, they're going to go back and rely on that. So we want to make sure that the organizations are conditioned to respond to the various crises which could occur. And then on the back end of that, we do media training. We always say we want you to be 60 minutes ready. We put the primary and secondary spokespeople through the paces. We put them on camera, we turn the lights on, and we put them in a vapor lock. We make it the hardest interview they've ever had. And then we coach again, we do more interviews, and we get them to a point where they are comfortable on camera, and that they really understand how to do that in a way that is effective. And again, speaking to consumers of the news, not just members of the news media. So that trifecta of services, so to speak, the assessment, the planning, and the media training has been pretty effective in the marketplace for us. But I will say the most successful leaders are predictive. They're predictive, and again, they understand that anyone with an internet connection and a recording device can and will wreak havoc on your brand, and they know what's going to happen. It's going to find you, and they embrace it. They don't avoid it, and they don't fear it.
There's some, for a university, there recently, some, the events in Florida, I think, are maybe disturbing. And I noticed in your book, you have a whole chapter about Virginia Tech, which changed the way in which, at least universities and I think police forces also respond to active shooter situations. But, if you've reviewed how organizations react to that, what would your advice be for, university, President Smokey's office is here, President Smoke in this sort of situation, for,
People looking around for him.
Yeah, he's not here, but he's on the camera.
Yes.
He's on the other side. But what would your advice be for our university or for all universities, really about, and as this is built up over the years and it still keeps going, so.
You brought up President Schmoke, and I just want to say that he was the mayor of the city of Baltimore when I was in the police department. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him, his integrity, and his ability to lead. So you all are very, very lucky at this point in time to be studying under his leadership. But what I see in the marketplace, schools and universities in particular, is they are very porous environments. So the ingress and egress, people can come in and out almost at will. And access control and visitor management is really where the breakdown occurs, okay? So those are really two important elements, access control and visitor management. On top of that, there are schools today, and I know this past weekend I was speaking to a couple of parents at a school where they are not even practicing lockdowns at this point, okay? The first order of leadership is to provide a safe place to live, work, and raise a family. So if you are the headmaster or the president of a university, whatever it might be, you have to make sure that people know and understand what to do. They need to understand the run, hide, fight model, what that means. They need to know where to lock down and how to do it. And there's some very progressive schools that I know that we've worked with where they practice lockdowns more frequently than fire drills. And these kids know how to react. So those are a couple of things that are really, really important. We can talk about gun control, we can talk about age limits, we can talk about the availability of the AR-15 and legislation and so on and so forth, but that is a mid to long-term solution. In the chapter that you're pointing out, tragically at Virginia Tech, he didn't use an AR-15, he used 2 Glock pistols, okay? And the AR-15 has been used in other scenarios. So this is not a gun control issue, it's become a gun control issue. But I want to know as a parent, what are my administrators doing tomorrow to make sure that my child is safe? And it comes down to making sure that there's a proper assessment, that there's proper policies and protocols, and that organizations are trained to standard. Okay, go back to how you practice is how you're going to play. And also there needs to be a much higher level of predictability. So if you look at the tragic active shooter case in Harford County not long ago at the Granite Company, here's someone who was arrested 41 times, convicted 15 times. A previous employer had gone out and tried to get a protective order against him, but yet he was hired, okay? Now I'm not saying that the company made a mistake or not. That's a horrible situation. But when you look at the track record, right, and you look at these active shooter situations, whether you're talking about Newtown, Aurora, Colorado, Dallas, we could go on and on and on. Generally, there's some kind of pattern of behavior. And so to me, it's an enforcement issue, it's a prevention issue, and it's a treatment issue. And it's a very, very, very big conversation. But I would say this, in the state of Maryland, there is a protective order process in place for domestic abuse and also abuse involving 2 parties where one party can go to a court commissioner, they can write in a statement what happened, and the court commissioner has the ability to read the facts and then make a decision to grant a temporary protective order until both parties go to court and a judge then makes a decision on whether or not the protective order is upheld or is dismissed or some other kind of action occurs. So why can't student bodies or school administrators learn of information, whether students are making threats online or talking to their friends, and use that model to try to protect the schools and get a protective order against a student so then it triggers a law enforcement action where at least temporarily weapons can be seized and a person is banned from property. I did an interview on this not long ago and I urged any elected official to take a hard look at it and potentially move it through legislation. And that's something that can occur at the state level very, very quickly so that we create a pause. We create a timeout to evaluate the system or the situation a little bit further. Now, you can argue that either way, but law enforcement authorities and administrators need a mechanism with which to conduct an evaluation. But it's very sad. You look at the track records of these shooters, and all the signs are there. And it's a very, very unpredictable situation, some would argue, and some would say it's very predictable. Well, where does that line stop and start? Tough situation, no easy answers, but something's got to be done. And if you've seen any of the video from inside of the school, and it's horrible. And if you have an opportunity to look at it, don't. It's tragic, tragic, and evokes a tremendous amount of emotion. The NRA is paying for it. Corporations are walking away from the organization. I mean, so much is going on right now in and around this issue. So you can have political posturing, you can have organizational stances, but most parents want to know, what are you doing to protect my kid tomorrow? And it comes down to access control, visitor management, and creating that organizational muscle memory inside, because lockdowns save lives.
Sure, that's very useful. I got a few more questions, but I thought it may be time for audience to ask questions or anything.
Yes.
So we'd like to have a microphone because we're live streaming on Facebook. Okay.
I just wanted to know, like, at what point companies engage with you. Like, I would imagine most companies are coming like too late in the game, and just about that kind of process.
Well, that's a really good question. Thank you. Most people in life, they don't want to call for outside help unless there is a degree of pain, right? So think about in your own life, there's a little bit of a ping in your automobile, or maybe a pipe might leak a little bit. But when it's Thanksgiving and the pipe is kind of a gusher all over your living room floor, it doesn't matter what it costs, get them in here now. Or if you're broken down on the side of 95, oh, I don't care what it costs, I need to get out of here. Well, organizations operate the same way sometimes, where there is enough pain. So for instance, a data breach, which might go public, or a sex scandal, which is going to hit the news, or a group of people have decided to mobilize and attack the organization on social media, and then they call and say, listen, we are over our skis and we don't know how to handle this. We need some outside help, somebody with some expertise. So they call when there is a smoldering issue, right? Or a full-blown crisis. By the way, the Institute of Crisis Management reports that, well, let me ask you, how many of all the crises reported in 2016, which is the latest data that we have, of all the crises that were reported by organizations across the country, how many of them do you think were smoldering by percentage versus sudden? Any guesses? 90 were smoldering. Anyone else? Okay, it's almost 70%. And if you look at the categories of crisis, whether it's discrimination, mismanagement, product recall, whatever, the largest piece of the pie, the biggest percentage, is mismanagement. So if you take a look at those two statistics, we as leaders know about the crises, but we fail to do anything about them, okay? So the point I'm making is the forward-thinking leaders, they engage right away because they want to make sure that they're ready to meet the moment. But most, they're in some degree of pain. They hear about us. That's how our business has grown, through referrals and through speaking engagements. And chief executives talk to one another. And they'll be like, oh my God, I got this thing going on. I don't know how to handle it. Hey, give Rob or give Fallston Group a call. They know their stuff, and they can chart the course for you and hopefully turn this thing into a positive over the long term. And then they call, we get in the door. I go in and I listen. Basically, I listen and become a trusted advisor very, very quickly. And when you earn people's trust during a very, their most difficult moment, they find other ways for you to work with them. So after it's all over, hey, can you handle our marketing? Can you facilitate our retreat? Can you be an extension of our leadership team? And that's how our business has grown. So does that answer your question? Okay, good.
Rob, is it different, or how is it different if it is different? Managing a crisis that it sort of comes up from sort of obfuscation or hiding, and I'm thinking of sort of VW, versus incident management like BP. Something broke. We're really sorry. It's down below. It's leaking. We didn't do anything, maybe.
Yeah.
So, but the one sort of, the hand of the market versus somebody actually kind of hiding in the background doing something.
Right, and I would put, Dieselgate, right, with Volkswagen. By the way, their market cap just, plummeted. And it's going to take them years and years to come out of, but that's a systemic, collusive, criminal issue, okay? And so I would put Wells Fargo into that category as well, with 200,000 false accounts. And when it finally came forward, it cost them $5 million in consumer remediation. A lot more than that in fines, and their ratings went down, right? So their bond rating or whatever went down. And so at the end of the day, they're paying a huge price. But these are issues that leaders know about, fail to do something about, and in many ways do it to try to enhance value. So if you look at motivation, I think that's much different than BP, who all of a sudden, by the way, many would say that BP knew that this was a risk when they went into the Gulf to try to go ahead and mine for oil. And it happened. So I would say that BP wasn't prepared for that eventuality, and that was very clear by their public statements. But in the Dieselgate case, Volkswagen case, and even Wells Fargo, there's malintent. I mean, that's much different. They are intent on doing something to inflate their valuation and, in my view, dupe investors. So, does that answer your question?
Well,
or do you have follow-up?
There's almost in Dieselgate, it seemed to me to be a group in the basement that was doing something that, at the white collar level, really wasn't aware of it, or there seemed to be a gap versus some extraneous event that the sort of missile from Mars happened, and now we got to account for it.
Yeah, well, there's an old saying in leadership, and I really like it, and that is that you can shift authority but never accountability. So how do that many, you can shift authority but never accountability. So how do that many vehicles make it to market, performing the way that they perform, and leadership not know about it? You're asleep at the wheel, in my opinion, and you're accountable on top of that. So are there things that occur that a leader doesn't know about and ultimately results in their demise? Yeah. And unfortunately, that's an inherent risk in leadership, which makes it even more important to know what's happening, at the depths of your organization through your reporting stream and those that, you leverage to find out what's happening. So I don't have a whole lot of sympathy for Volkswagen or Wells Fargo. However, BP, while it's predictable, I think that they were trying to, manage their way through the crisis. They didn't do a very good job, and sadly, a lot of people lost their livings as a result of it. So I look at the motivations, but really what it comes back to is value. And by the way, I'm going to throw something else out there. In my experience, I have found that there is 4 core motivating factors on why people do bad things. 4 core motivating factors on why people do bad things. Do you know what they are? Close, but that's not the term. Come on, guys. I'm way over my limit for the day in terms of the words I speak.
Is one of them fear?
Fear? No, that's not one of them, but it's a really, really good guess. Why do people do bad things? Okay, money, that's one. Not jealousy. Well,
Power, anger.
Power. So money and power. That's 2 of the 4. Revenge. Very good. That's 3 of the 4. Say it again. Who said that? Did you mean sex? Because if you meant sex, you're right. Okay? So money, power, sex, and revenge. So think about that for a moment. Of all the cases that you hear about, all right, and think of people you know in your own life. If they seem to be motivated every day by money, or sex, or revenge, or power, whatever it might be, you really have to take a hard look, and you have to wonder if they're making the right life decisions and maybe even the right organizational decisions, depending on their role within a company. But money, power, sex, and revenge. Think about it. The core motivating factors on why people do bad things. And if you have somebody who is gravitating toward 2 of the 4, 3 of the 4, or 4 of the 4, you got a powder keg, waiting to go off.
No, I don't want to interrupt Nick, but I can't resist, with a comeback on this, because money and power, particularly, you look at I've done a lot of work with boards and chief executives and things like that. The thing that, makes, for me, difference between somebody who gets to a chief executive. I'm not saying whether they're a good chief executive, but, whether they're a chief executive or not, they have to be energized by power. And, sometimes it might be power they're going for the organization, but a lot of times it will be for them personally. And I don't know if you've ever been in a compensation committee and, and try to bring down somebody's pay. I can assure you, it's pretty much motivated by money. So 2 out of the 4 things that gets people in trouble criminally are the kind of things that are very things that, in fact, usually will propel people into these senior jobs. I can't say anything about sex for the chief executive, but certainly power and money. So I mean, it's kind of a challenge, but is it, or maybe are we surprised then that so many companies don't react well?
I think it's perfectly acceptable to want to be a leader. I think it's perfectly acceptable to make money in a capitalistic society. I think you should increase the valuation as a chief executive. I mean, that's your job, okay? But are you making poor decisions because of the drive for money? We just talked about a couple of organizations. Why would Volkswagen make the decision that they made which disrupted the environment? Why would Wells Fargo create false accounts? Why? Anybody?
Save face.
Yeah.
Achieve a sales goal, which means what? More money, okay? And there are people in the world that we know who strive for power no matter what. Not because they want to change the world for the good, but because they want the power, because they have the ego. And ego, some people say, stands for everybody's got one, right? But what I'm saying is there's abuse of power. You can use power for great, great things. You can use money for wonderful things. But if you take a look at organizations or people that wind up in crisis, those 4 core motivators, I'm telling you, 95% of the time, it's one of those 4. And based on my own experience and working with a lot of people who found themselves in trouble.
Hello. So you mentioned about talking about the optimistic leadership trait being so important. And as a part of a small business startup,
Yeah.
how would you approach instilling that optimism in the people who you deemed as toxic?
So I think your question is can you take a toxic person and make them optimistic or
Yeah.
have a good attitude?
Yep, you got it.
Well, let me ask you this, at what cost? Right, so you're in a startup firm and you have someone who is a pessimist. And there's probably not a whole lot you're going to do except leadership by example over time to turn them around. Meanwhile, you've made a hiring decision and that person's taking your money to achieve a goal, but probably not doing it in a way that the optimist could. So I would ask you, at what cost, okay? Now, you could have a pessimist that grumbles at the world and they're the best salesperson in the world. Well, you have to evaluate that for your own business. But do I believe that a pessimist can become an optimist over time? Well, probably, but at what expense? And who do you surround yourself with? And time is money, and you've got to achieve your business goals as well. The question I would ask you is, how does it impact you? Do you tiptoe around the person? Are you worried about what mood they're in when they come in every day? Do you make concessions for them because you know they're going to gripe and they moan? When you have to start managing around people, that's when I think it's time for them to find another team.
Great, thank you.
And by the way, the old saying, slow to hire, quick to fire, I wish I learned that a long time ago because I am an empathetic person and I care deeply about others and my client. And I've invested a lot in employees, and no matter how hard I tried, I took it as a personal challenge many times to get somebody to a performance level that was expected. They just couldn't get there. And I made the mistake of hanging on too long. And sometimes I'll have a meeting with someone and talk about maybe the end of their time with the company, and they're relieved and they're thankful because you've let them off the hook. So tough dynamic for sure. but you got to surround yourself with the right people. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Let me ask you, kind of question about yourself. I'm just you started off in public service and many years in public service, and then clearly you gravitated in business and you're working with business people. So, how did you kind of reinvent yourself from, the public service person to business person? I mean,
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and interestingly enough, when I did a little bit of soul searching before I started the company, what I found the common thread was between everything that I've done in my career, whether it's be a police officer, a chief of staff, or worked for Rick in baseball. I ran Cal's core business for, 7 years. I enjoy helping people. And when the detective asked me why I wanted to be a member of the police department, I said, very honestly, I want to help people. And in my business today, the thread is helping people during life's most critical times. And I can, do that on many different platforms. But I was always very, very curious. When I went to class at UB, I was very curious. Hopkins, today I'm very, very curious. I belong to a number of groups, that are forward-thinking entrepreneurs who want to make the world a better place, and they have some wonderful ideas. And I just love being around people who challenge me intellectually and make me think of things a little bit differently. It shapes my thinking, and then I think, how do I apply it to what I'm doing? So even when I was in the police department, I was telling a story earlier, while on patrol, there was a restaurant in the 1700 block of Pratt Street called O'Bricky's. Some of you folks may remember O'Bricky's. Well, they had a problem because their customers were parking blocks away, and they were fearful that their customers would become a victim of a crime. So I started a little valet business for them, and the next thing I know, I had 15 officers, from high-ranking supervisors down to patrol officers, kind of on my little side hustle here for valet parking. So I found ways to try to make something bigger, faster, stronger. I didn't always succeed, but it's just in my nature to look at those kinds of things, even in my own business. What can we do to change with the marketplace? And so, in some ways, the police department taught me an awful lot about life, about humans, and I wouldn't have traded that experience for the world. The men and women I worked around were fantastic. I have the utmost respect for law enforcement officers. The overwhelming majority of officers in this country are ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances each and every day. But from that, I just kind of tried to, through a building block process, continue to learn and make sure that I could take the lessons learned and apply it to where my interests lied. So worked at the local, state, and federal levels of government, worked for Cal in the private sector. Again, translatable skills, and leadership followed me wherever I went. And today I advise, very public leaders and how to survive really, really difficult times. I don't know if that answers your question, but always willing to reinvent myself. But some people think, oh, well, you were a steel worker and now you're a cook. No, there's translatable skills through all of that. And when you peel the layers back and you realize the talents that you have, you can take them anywhere. Package them up and take them because they do have application. And don't be afraid, You may remember me talking about passion and competency and making a difference in the world of monetization. There's a lot of people that make a lot of money, and they're very competent, but they hate what they do every single day. And then there's a lot of people who are very passionate, and they're good at what they do, and they make no money. We call that a hobby. The point I'm making is when you find that bullseye where you have passion, you're competent, you make a difference, and you can monetize it and earn a living, that's where you need to live your life. And I would see officers back in the day who I had a tremendous amount of respect for, work 20, 30, 40 years on the job. They would retire on a Friday and then get a job working security on Monday. And I would look and I'd say, do I want to go ahead and work 40 years? My grandfather worked 38 years at General Motors. Thank God he did. He raised a family. But for me, I just had, aspirations to do other things, and it didn't bother me that I would walk away from an industry with a body of experience and apply it to a new venture. And so I would really encourage you that if you're in a life situation, don't be afraid to change. You know, and in this day and age, I think young people, they do it probably better than any of us did. You know, when I was growing up, it was what? You work 30 years somewhere, 40 years, you got a gold watch and you retired. Well, I want the gold watch after 2 years, and then let's go find the next one. So not in a greedy way, but in an accomplished way. You know, what can I take with me and make a positive difference in other people's lives along the way?
Just a quick follow-up to that. So as you went through this transition, clearly being in a fairly niche type of industry, what type of process or educational approach or what type of tools did you use to try and really hone your perspective and how you were going to interact with these various leaders and trying to navigate these crises?
Are you talking about my company now?
Your company now.
Right. So when you're a student of leadership and you begin to go ahead and absorb everything you can about crisis, you do a couple things. One is you rely on your body of experience, right? I was on the core executive team of organizations that I worked for in the Baltimore Police Department, the Justice Department, the state, and for Ripken Baseball. So I knew what it was like to sit, in that chair and have to worry about people and financials and, all those different disciplines. And so when I coach other folks, there's an immediate connection because I understand their world. And so the question becomes, well, how do you then take them and navigate them through a really, really tough time? And what I found is, maybe just having a knack for it, again, understanding all of the little nuances that surround a potential situation, and then take that level of complexity and break it down into the basic steps to, number one, help them identify their navigational fix, and number two, help them achieve their goal, whatever it might be, personal or professional. I think it also helps, someone in my 50s who has 3 boys and been married a pretty long time. You often find that people's situations are both personal and professional. And many times what occurs at home, bleeds over to work and vice versa. And so you really become a life coach. You become a life coach because people want to talk in a safe environment and they trust you with their secrets that they would tell no one else. And so when you treat that relationship very respectfully and you're confidential in your approach and you earn people's trust and you give competent advice, that really is the secret. But there is no, textbook to read or anything. To me, effective crisis leaders have instinct and experience, and that's built over time. And by the way, I want to add this, if you don't mind. Yeah. A lot of people think that crisis management is simply how do you spin the local news story? How do you spin it in the news? And it's the whole communications piece. That's not it. What we do and what's different is we focus on leadership, strategy, and communications. That's the intersection that we work around each and every day. And there's a misnomer. People think, oh, we're going to be in trouble. Let's call a PR firm. No. There's a lot of great PR firms in town. I know a lot of them, got a lot of respect for them. But they're not approaching a crisis except through a news release and what looks good in the court of public opinion. This goes much, much deeper. It's the leadership prowess, the leadership tenets, the strategic decision-making that needs to occur, and then communications is the easy piece, as long as you do it artfully and effectively.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've always said there's no substitute for experience, right? So your experience is what's driving your success and your interactions. Just to briefly, from a business perspective, clearly you are passionate, clearly you have experience, clearly you speak well and I'm sure interact well with the executives. In your business, how many of those relationships and situations do you touch personally versus potentially other people in your organization touching it? And is that a scalable business? Because ultimately experience is individual, sometimes can be taught, but at the end of the day, it's more individual than necessarily taught.
Great question. So it really comes down to, can you really scale the business? The answer to your question, every crisis client that comes through our door, I touch, I'm a part of, I manage, because there is no substitute for that experience. I bring others into the fold to help me manage, depending on what needs to be done. from a communications or a marketing perspective or life coaching. I mean, we've worked with families, high-profile families, and their kids needed to rely on someone that they could trust, and there's other people in my firm who do a great job. So it's very much an all-hands-on-deck approach when we get a hot crisis client. But I am absolutely the one who oversees that vertical. To scale it effectively, you know, I've got to find other people who have the instinct and experience. Attorneys have it mostly, but what I find is other service providers get around an organization, and then we go in and we're able to quarterback, because attorneys, many times, there's a lot of great attorneys, but sometimes they are very conservative, and they say, well, wait a minute, we don't want to say anything. We don't want to apologize. We don't want to go public because we believe that we can win this case in civil court or criminal court. And then the marketing person will say, no, 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 we got to go public right away. And then there'll be 15 other opinions from strong influencers inside of the organization. And my job is to go in there, give my assessment and my opinion based on my experience, and try to get everybody to line up. And once I get everybody to line up, slam the lid on, boom, this is what we're doing, and we move forward. So everybody's got to give a little bit. But if you can win in civil court and you can win in criminal court, but you lose in the court of public opinion, who cares? You're out of business. Then what? Your general counsel is off doing something else. So once we get everybody to understand that, through case studies, through experience, and we've earned their trust, and we make some decisions and get some early wins, all of a sudden they're believers. And then that's what makes us effective. Now, what makes us effective is that we immerse ourselves in people's lives. Because you know they're not always worried between 9 and 5. They're worried late at night, at 1 o'clock in the morning, when everybody else has gone to bed and they need somebody to talk to. Or very early when they're about to start their day and my phone rings at 5 o'clock because somebody wants to talk. And you know what? I'm glad they do. And the point I'm making is that you have to be there for your client and you immerse yourself in their lives. But it's also what wears us out, right? And you have to be able to spread that around to the degree that you can. So is it scalable? Absolutely, because there's no geographic boundary. There's no industry that we can't touch because everybody deals with crisis. The challenge is can you get the right people around the table who can run point on a major crisis that's going to become public. I've got a great, great team, and I'm very, very grateful for them. But in order for us to get to the levels that we want to be, you know, on an international scale, we have to continue to build that energy and that, you know, bench of strength and, you know, the experience. But it's a great question.
So here's maybe my last question of this, and it, you know, I think you know, one of the great things, I mean, your business, I mean, I think it's, there's a, you know, interesting lesson here. This is more than, you know, it's more than PR, right? You know, it's leadership, it's strategy, it's communications. You cover a variety of areas, you know, yourself, marketing, risk, as well as just, you know, a lot of thoughts about good leadership. So I was thinking earlier on about what you were saying about what your passion was and how you got there. I mean, what would your advice to the students here who are, you know, and we've got undergraduates with different specialisms, some want to be great PR people, finance, accountants, MBA students who are going to be, you know, leaders. You know, what would your advice to the students who are here be to help them prepare their careers?
Well, first off, I always believe that you need to be true to yourself and not worry about what other people think. All right? There's a tendency for us sometimes to make decisions based on what other people think, particularly career decisions. It's my parents wanted me to do, this is what my sister did, whatever it is, okay? Be true to yourself and identify your passion and follow your passion. Now, it sounds like trite advice, I get it. A lot of people say, follow your passion. Well, that's great if you can monetize it, right, and earn your living that way as well. But I do believe it's very important to take inventory of yourself. One thing I did before I started the business is I took something called the CVI assessment, Core Values Index Assessment. And I talked to people that knew me really, really well. And I asked for honest feedback. I said, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Tell me what you think I'm really good at. Tell me what you think I'm not so good at. And then see if that marries up with my passion. So that's one thing. Be true to yourself and don't worry about what other people think. So that means be your authentic self. Secondly, I believe that you always have to be curious. Be curious, be curious, be curious, and learn. There's a tendency sometimes for us to be intolerant of people that are different, okay? And all of us have it to a degree, but because you don't like someone doesn't mean they don't have a valid point of view. So be tolerant of others and listen to other people. They just may have an answer that you happen to be looking for. I think that's really, really important. So be curious, learn as much as you can. Another thing I'd say is to build and leverage your network. All right, a lot of people don't necessarily build a network and rely on that network for advice. So look for groups, look for people who energize you, that they are that half full, that bucket full of energy that we're looking for, because when you are around people who give you energy, you're going to be motivated by them. That old saying, if you're friends with 4 guys who are bankrupt, I'll show you the 5th. It's going to be you, because that's who you hang out with. So I think that's really, really important. And if you start a business and you're entrepreneurial oriented, and you have that spirit, or if you're a leader in an organization, you're going to be lonely. It's great sitting up here. I have a business, it's great, we talk about it, we do a lot of great things. But let me tell you something. You gotta love the smell of napalm in the morning. You gotta love working on your business and in your business. Because when everybody else doubts your business model, I can't tell you how many people I had sitting around my living room table just, hey, I'm gonna tell you about an idea I had. Oh, that's great, Rob, really good. Let me know when you wanna believe in it. You gotta go get it. And I don't take that for granted, by the way. Just because we've been in business 8 years doesn't mean that next month something can't happen that'll completely disrupt the company. So I would say that you've got to be comfortable with discomfort. I heard that from Michael Port when I was with him recently, but it's true. And so when you realize that you don't mind taking risks, and you're comfortable in being the jockey, and you don't care about what other people think, which can be very liberating, and you're very curious, and you understand your why. To me, that's the key. What is your why? Peel the layers back and figure out what it is you want to do every single day, but most importantly, why you do it, right? Simon Sinek's video, the how, the what, and the why. Do you know your why? After a lot of introspection, man, I obsessed about it. Why am I doing this? Seriously, why am I doing what I'm doing every day? And when I did that, I learned that when I was sitting in there with Detective Denko from who was a former homicide detective, when I was applying to be a police officer in the city of Baltimore, and he asked me why I wanted the job, to before I started the business, and when people ask me that question today, it's because I really, really believe the spirit of service, and I love helping people during life's most critical times. There's no better day for me than when someone says, man, we don't know what we would have done without your team. No better day. And so if you feel like you've made a difference and it drives you, get after it. But understand your why. It's really, really, really important.
So Rob, this has been great. I really appreciate this. I think that in the Merrick School, I mean, we think we stand for a number of things. One of the things I think it sort of underlies, what we believe about business and business education is that we like to get things done. Okay, mm-hmm. And so you clearly also, as well as doing a lot of things in your life, get things done and clearly got passion for helping other people. But I think that and what's great, I think you sort of embody that spirit of optimism that you're looking, but you're too old to get in the Navy SEALs. But I think also, you sort of embody what we would like to think of Merrick alumni, aspire to, and that is driven with, a real sense of consistent values. I can see that doesn't that comes through. So, you know, this has been a great learning experience. I appreciate you coming. Those of you who want to meet Rob, talk to him later. There is a few, you know, light refreshments outside, and students, there's a good chance to give you a business card, you know, give you your resume, and so we'll have a few minutes for light refreshments. So again, thank you. Okay. The next Merrick Engages, by the way, is April 17th, and it's, I believe, and it's 17th, I believe, it's my son's birthday, and it's a John Belcher, who's the founder of Airink, and he's going to talk about how he built a business from nothing to over $1 billion and sold it to Carlyle Group for several multiples of $1 billion. Okay, so if you've got business and you want to grow it to $1 billion and sell it for several billion multiples, that would be a good one to come to. Okay.
I don't think he was a street cop.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.